Back when Miguel Felix Gallardo, or El Padrino, took control of the entire Mexican drug business and established the notorious Guadalajara cartel, he was the first of their kind. Then came Pablo Escobar, who built the ultimate coke empire. But Escobar died 3 decades ago, and since then, many other people have tried to grow their own organized crime empires. Some of them are even scarier than Escobar and El Chapo.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican kingpin known as El Mencho. He's blamed for a flood of narcotics into the U.S.
The latest cartel target, Mexico's military. The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Let's explore their terrifying stories. Some of the most dangerous drug lords in business today are the ones we don't know about. Kenny Young Ang Chin is one of them. If you look up his name online, you find one picture of him and the fact that he's one of the most wanted men by the DEA. For an aspiring star, internet anonymity would be the worst nightmare. But for a brutal kingpin, it's the dream. No one knows who you are, where you are, or why you're so sought out by the authorities. Kenny Young Ang Chin is wanted by the DEA for the huge quantity of heroin he distributes in the United States. And needless to say, when you control a large narcotics business, it comes with threats, violence, and even assassinations. But there's an even darker side of Young Ang Chin's story. Sadly, he employs minors to do his dirty work. This is wrong on so many levels, but for him, it's just business. Minors, especially if they're illegal immigrants, are much easier to corrupt with small money and much more unaware of the dangers of trafficking. If they end up arrested or even dead, it's not Chin who suffers. In his mind, they're just expendable. So you can see why Chin is a wanted man, but he's so well hidden, it might be a while before the DEA finally gets their hands on him. These are Jesus and Yvonne, the sons of the notorious kingpin El Chapo. Today, they're just as ruthless as their now incarcerated father. After the Guadalajara cartel was dissolved in 1989, El Chapo, or Joaquin Guzman, grew his own empire, the Sinaloa cartel. It became one of the most violent, bloodthirsty, and power-hungry cartels in the entire world. At its peak, the Sinaloa cartel controlled half of the Mexican drug trade and made $3 billion every single day. El Chapo was a ruthless kingpin, killing and maiming his way to the top of the pyramid. But he was also a family man. Indeed, El Chapo had at least 10 children. Some think it's as many as 20. And much like traditional patriarchy, El Chapo made his eldest sons into his most trusted servants.
Judy, they are known as Los Chapitos, the 4 most trusted sons of the world's most notorious kingpin.
Indeed, Yvonne and Jesus didn't really stand a chance at any other career. They are the sons of El Chapo and his first wife, Maria Alejandra Salazar Hernandez. Maria herself was related to Hector Luis Palma Salazar, aka El Güero. The two started dating while they were working for the Guadalajara cartel. Needless to say, this was the only model Yvonne and Jesus saw growing up. By the time they were teenagers, their father had completely engulfed them in the cartel business, and because Yvonne and Jesus were the eldest, their father trusted them with taking charge of trafficking. They coordinated transportation from Colombia and Ecuador to Mexico, and from Mexico to the United States. Then they oversaw the distribution of narcotics to wholesale customers in the US and collected subsequent proceeds. Had El Chapo remained free, his sons might have never made it to kingpin level. But in 2016, El Chapo was arrested for the third and final time. He was extradited to the United States and sent to the Florence Supermax, the country's highest security prison. So it was time for Yvonne and Jesus to step out of their father's shadow. They grew the Sinaloa cartel by building new, more sophisticated labs and expanding transportation to ships and planes. This might sound like they're just good businessmen, but the Sinaloa cartel also deals with bribing officials, killing enemies, threatening their families, and even killing authorities who stand in their way. In 2019, Yvonne led an extremely bloody rescue of his half-brother Ovidio. Ovidio had been arrested by Mexican police, but Yvonne couldn't handle it, so he sent a whole army of sicarios to his rescue. Officers and civilians lost their lives in the process. Jesus is no angel either. Apart from overseeing trafficking and bribing officials, he ordered assassinations and kidnappings. He's the cartel's mad dog, as well as the brains behind the labs and transportation. In 2012, the United States Department of the Treasury designated Yvonne under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act, naming him a lieutenant of El Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa Cartel. Today, there are $5 million rewards on both Yvonne's and Jesus' heads. They're considered to be new rulers of the Sinaloa Cartel. But wait, there's someone else sharing the throne. This is Ismael Zambada Garcia, aka El Mayo. In 2016, El Chapo was arrested and extradited to the US to spend his life in prison. People were expecting a trial where El Chapo denied his crimes, but they didn't expect him to point his finger at someone else entirely. El Chapo shocked the jury when he claimed people should be looking at the real leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, El Mayo. El Mayo has been around for a long time. He was friends with El Padrino and climbed the ranks of the Guadalajara cartel with El Chapo, who started as the cartel's truck driver. But El Mayo wanted to be his own boss. Even after his own family was killed by a rival cartel, he continued to climb the ranks and established himself as Sinaloa's boss. This came in handy as El Chapo was in and out of prison. By 2000, he'd superseded El Chapo, who was in prison in Mexico and was smuggling thousands of tons of Colombian candy, dust, smack, and pot. In 2009, he was indicted for his crimes against the US. The Sinaloa Cartel is a really nasty one. They even kill women and children. Sometimes the sicarios violate women and force their families to watch. It's not even about the money anymore. It's about power and unspeakable violence. And as the DEA is fighting hard to catch El Mayo, several more people fall victim to the Sinaloa Cartel. Today, there's a staggering $15 million reward for any information leading to El Mayo's capture. While El Chapo's sons, Yvonne and Jesus, had various run-ins with the American law, El Mayo continues to evade the DEA to this day. Age 74, he is still one of the most ruthless lords out there, and he hasn't spent 1 minute inside a prison. In 2010, El Mayo broke from cover in a very strange interview with the Mexican magazine Proceso. He confessed that he would happily take his own life rather than go to prison. But when other Sinaloa sicarios are interviewed about their boss, they refuse to say his name. If El Mayo finds out someone talked about him, he will sentence him to the most brutal end he can imagine. El Mayo is just as brutal as El Chapo, if not more. There's a theory that El Mayo threw El Chapo under the bus as he encouraged his son Vicente to turn on El Chapo in return for his own freedom. Considering that he is still evading justice while ruling the largest Mexican cartel, El Mayo might just be the most ruthless and cunning kingpin today. This is Dario Asuga. He is known as the most dangerous drug trafficker in the world. He was born in September 1971 in Nicoclí, northwestern Colombia. When he was 18, he joined the Popular Liberation Army, a daredevil guerrilla group with a goal to defend poor, rural people from landowners and the government. Within 2 years, the guerrilla group had signed a peace agreement with the government, but Dario had gotten a thirst for violence. He then joined the United Self-Defenses of Colombia, a far-right paramilitary group and trafficking organization. Around this time, he became known as Otto Niel. In 2005, Otto Niel started working for Daniel Renton Herrera, the kingpin of the Los Carabineros cartel. This is the notorious Gulf clan. Otto Niel's bloodthirst and cunning led him to the top of the game in 2009. Even after his own brother was killed in a police raid, Otto Niel didn't back down. He was only more power hungry. The Gulf clan is extremely well organized, and his army of assassins terrorized much of northern Colombia to gain control of major smuggling routes through thick jungles north to Central America and onto the US. Imagine being responsible for raising the homicide rates in the country that's already known for a high murder rate. In 2009, Otto Niel was indicted for the first time in Manhattan federal court on narcotics charges and for allegedly providing assistance to a far-right paramilitary group designated as a terrorist organization by the US government. Later indictments accused him of importing into the US at least 73 metric tons of white powder between 2003 and 2014 through Venezuela, Guatemala, Mexico, Panama, and Honduras. But Otto Niel continued to elude the authorities for years. Meanwhile, his reign of terror was only reaching new heights. But Pablo Escobar's reign came to a brutal end, and so did Dario's. In October 2021, he was finally captured in Colombia.
Colombia said the country's most wanted drug lord will be extradited to the United States. Dario Antonio Asuga, better known as Otto Niel, was seized at his hideout in an operation involving hundreds of soldiers. The U.S. had placed a $5 million bounty on his head.
Otto Niel was extradited to the US, and it's likely he will never be free again, but his reign of terror is far from over. In May 2022, the Gulf Cartel laid siege to several communities in Colombia as a sign of protest against Otto Niel's capture. The sicarios imposed strict lockdowns, terminated local businesses, closed off roads, and threaten residents. If they left their homes, they would set their cars and homes on fire. They destroyed 118 cars anyway. Also, they killed 24 people and attempted to kill 15 more. A long list of towns also ran out of basic supplies because of the strike. So the Gulf Clan continues to rule with fear even after the demise of their leader. Or is Otto Niel still ruling the cartel from prison? Let's leave Colombia and fly to Honduras, where one of the most dangerous drug lords might be hiding. This is Yulan Carias, also known as Alexander Mendoza, or Porky. He's the leader of the brutal MS-13 gang. In November 2021, Carias was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. He is wanted for racketeering, narcotics trafficking, and firearm offenses. But just like most drug lords, Carias doesn't just do illegal business. He orders hits on anyone involved in rival gangs, and might even take pleasure in doing the deed himself. In 2008, he was convicted, charged, and sent to prison in Honduras. But 2 years later, he escaped in the most violent way. An army of 20 gunmen dressed in military and police uniforms stormed the courthouse. While Carias was brought there for a hearing, they killed everyone on site and took Carias with them. To this day, he is wanted both in Honduras and the United States. It's believed he is hiding in Honduras, but truth be told, he could be hiding anywhere, all the while ordering hits and leading the MS-13 from the shadows. This is Nemesio Carvantes, aka El Mencho.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho. He's blamed for a flood of narcotics into the U.S.
The Sinaloa cartel is not the only scary Mexican cartel. In fact, there's an even bloodier one today, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. It's a ruthless, power-hungry cartel that has made a habit out of torturing its enemies to death and putting videos of it online. CJNG is run by none other than El Mencho.
Ocho, ocho, una aguililla, ocho heridos, X13, ocho.
This is just one moment recorded by Vice when 14 police officers were killed and many others wounded by the CJNG. Throughout the last 2 decades, CJNG are responsible for hundreds of civilian deaths and endless bloody wars with the rival cartels.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
Kidnappings, and piles of bodies have become normalized in a huge area of Mexico ever since the CJNG was created around 2009. And a big chunk of Mexico is unsafe to live in simply because of the constant wars carried out by CJNG against rival cartels, such as United Cartels. El Aguaje was literally turned into a ghost town after one particularly bloody battle. The town was deserted because of El Mencho's ambition to control the Mexican drug trade.
El Aguaje se convirtió en un pueblo fantasma. Las casas pues ya no son las mismas, todas están balaceadas. Antes aquí es donde estaban los Jaliscos. Esto era la barricada de ellos.
El Mencho first came to the U.S. as an illegal immigrant. After he was deported, he started working for the Millennial Cartel. He slowly climbed its ranks, and when the Millennial bosses were killed or put in jail, he decided to start his own cartel, the Jalisco New Generation. CJNG quickly became one of the most brutal cartels out there. El Mencho had people infiltrate the police so that they always know when they're being threatened. When El Mencho found out the authorities were planning to arrest 2 smaller bosses, El Ere and El Apa, he ordered an operation meant to distract the military. It was a particularly bloody one.
In early August, violence exploded in western Mexico. Roads were blocked, cartel gunmen cruised the streets at will, and in the city of Guanajuato, 25 outlets of a popular convenience store were burned to the ground.
CJNG makes a big thing out of its military equipment and heavy artillery. The CJNG cartel was inspired by an older cartel, Los Zetas. They also use military-grade weapons and ex-soldiers to spread fear and commit more organized crimes. But the CJNG glorifies violence to an unprecedented level. It's not even about money anymore. It's about territory and letting people know what happens if you mess with the CJNG. It's believed that this is how El Mencho eludes the police to this day. He's not on the run. He's perfectly safe in Michoacan, where the cartel is based. And he's always surrounded by a military-trained army. Anyone who would try to arrest him would end up getting shot before you could get close to him. El Mencho doesn't believe in bribery, like the Sinaloa cartel leaders. Instead, he uses sheer force and intimidation to get what he wants. For his soldiers, this is an honorable thing. CJNG loves El Mencho.
Yo sé quién es mi patrón, señor Don Mencho, una persona muy honorable y las personas que lo conocen saben la calidad de persona que es. Si yo no pensara de la forma que yo pienso, yo no perteneciera o no fuera parte de este cartel.
This sounds a bit too much like a cult of personality, but sadly, this is how kingpins get to the top. They describe themselves with big words like honorable, fair, and ambitious, all the while killing, torturing, and intimidating people into submission. El Mencho rules with fear. Every CJ&G soldier sees what happens to those who disobey him. They have no choice but to respect him, whether they believe in his values or not. As of today, El Mencho is Mexico's most wanted. Why? His cartel is now targeting the Mexican military.
The latest cartel target, Mexico's military. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
The helicopter was thought to be tracking El Mencho. He couldn't have that. According to the DEA, El Mencho is even more sneaky.
And all that violence is only to have leverage in the negotiations with the government, with politicians, right? They create these chaos to go and sit with the local politicians and say like, okay, do you want more or shall we negotiate this?
It really seems like there is no end to El Mencho's lust for power. If the authorities give him what he wants, he will only militarize some more and make the CJ&G more powerful. If they decline, he will continue to kill officers and civilians until they do. Today, even the Mexican military lives in constant fear of CJ&G attacks.
¿Un dron o qué?
Ese mero.
¿Dónde está el dron?
Está volando derecho arriba.
Hay un dron.
At the end of 2022, The Guardian reported 26,000 murders in Mexico. The last few years have been record-setting in terms of homicides. In 2021, there were 94 homicides per day. Violence is at an all-time high, and El Mencho is responsible for a huge part of it. Will El Mencho ever get caught? And will CJ&G's insatiable lust ever be put to an end? According to recent rumors, it just might. In 2020, it was reported that El Mencho suffered from kidney disease and had built his own private hospital to treat it. In February 2022, unconfirmed reports started popping up with even bigger news that El Mencho died in a hospital following a respiratory arrest. His death has never been confirmed, and cartel members give conflicting stories about it.
So with all the rumors around El Mencho being dead or very ill or out of the cartel, that started, I guess they started like around 2020 when we started reading about El Mencho being out of the Cartel Jalisco. I reached out to two middle range commanders inside the Cartel Jalisco Guadalajara. One of them believed that he was just literally just out of the cartel. He's well, he's alive. He's just like stepped up or stepped out of the cartel. And the other guy believes that El Mencho is actually pretty ill or might even be dead.
But if El Mencho is truly dead, it may just be the first step toward the end of cartel violence in Mexico. At the moment, the war between Sinaloa cartel and the CJ&G is the root cause of most victims in the country. But you know how sometimes when lords die, the whole cartel crumbles under him? As of 2023, it already seems like CJ&G is splitting up into smaller factions and fighting each other.
Tomito, el dron, güey. Tráeme el dron. El dron. Tráeme el dron, güey. Las pilas.
Me dieron los putazos.
While El Mencho remains in the shadows, his fate unconfirmed, his brutal legacy continues. We have yet to see an end to the cartel wars, and the CJ&G is still one of Mexico's biggest threats ever. Let us fly all the way to Italy for this story. Rocco Morabito was one of Italy's most wanted men. He was known as the King of Milan and the ultimate escape artist. Rocco was born into the Calabrian town of Africo in a family already tied to the mafia. One of his relatives was mafia boss Giuseppe Morabito, and by the time he was a young man, Rocco was a key figure in the 'Ndrangheta mafia, which controls white powder trafficking in Italy and abroad. Rocco was still in his 20s when he became one of the most wanted traffickers in Italy after he established brand new coke smuggling routes from South America into Milan. He was a wanted man for 3 decades before the police managed to catch him. When he realized the police were on his tail, Rocco Morabito fled to Brazil and assumed a fake identity, Francisco Capeledo. Then he moved to Uruguay, where he lived in a lavish resort villa for 13 years. His home was filled with incredibly expensive art, but Rocco would live a modest life outside his house, so as to not attract attention. However, he couldn't help but to throw his daughter a super luxurious birthday party, and that's when people started to question his riches. Then, Rocco made another mistake. He registered his daughter at school under her real name. After this, the police put him under surveillance. In September 2017, Rocco had a fight with his wife and he moved into a hotel in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay. That's when the police swooped in. They found a gun, 13 cell phones, and 150 passport photos of Rocco in different guises. But even this wasn't the end of Rocco's freedom. In 2019, he was in Uruguay prison awaiting extradition to Italy when he escaped through a hole in the roof. By 2020, Interpol was dead set on destroying Ndrangheta Mafia, so they put more resources than ever into tracking down Rocco Morabito. In 2021, he was located and arrested in João Pessoa, Brazil. And in July 2022, he was finally sent over to Italy to be tried for his crimes. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison at the age of 55. This means that he will be released at 85 or die in prison. With such strong ties to the notorious Ndrangheta Mafia, it's likely Rocco will still conduct business from inside his prison. This is Ramo Cipriano. He may not be the most dangerous drug lord on this list, but he is the youngest. He was born in 1997. In 2023, he'll be turning 26. And yet, he's one of the most wanted men in the United States. According to DEA, he resides in California. And this is where he conducts business on behalf of the Sinaloa Cartel. Indeed, the notorious Sinaloa Cartel has people everywhere, and they go to extreme lengths to ensure their ongoing growth. Cipriano is in charge of white powder distribution on the West Coast, but he is slowly climbing the ranks of the cartel, so he already has many people working for him, wreaking havoc and spreading violence to protect him and his cartel. This is the problem. When you want to climb a cartel's ranks, you need to prove that you're one of the most vicious and violent people out there. And as you get desensitized to violence, you only become worse. As Ramo is still on the run and eluding the DEA, he could still grow the Sinaloa network in the US, making them more powerful than ever. Ramo can be seen as a symbol of just how dangerous and brutal narcotics gangs are in general. The bloodlust never stops. The cartels recruit people who will do anything to have money and power, violent, vengeful people who don't care for justice and even get a kick out of inflicting pain. Ramos Cipriano was born in 1997. Chin is even recruiting minors. How many people are being recruited every single day into a life of unspeakable crime? And will it ever stop? As the young people grow up, they can become the new Escobar, El Chapo, and El Mayo. Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about this case? Who do you think is the most dangerous drug lord today? And did we miss any? Let us know in the comments section, and before you leave, make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons. Till next time, and stay safe.